Hey, Clark.
What's up, Tim?
What do you think will have a bigger impact on our health after our couple days here in Las Vegas? Spending that whole day outside of the desert at the former nuclear test site, or those embarrassing 5 minutes at the craps table?
Tim, I think you're being super critical.
Welcome to another episode of the Super Critical Podcast, where we delve into the fun and oftentimes nonsensical way pop culture portrays nuclear weapons. My name is Tim Westmyer, someone who studies nuclear weapons and works on nuclear security for a living. And I am honored to be joined today in Las Vegas by my friend, former college roommate, and more importantly, former college debate partner, Clark. Clark, how you doing today?
I'm good, Tim. I am a farmer, a father, and I have no experience with nuclear weapons other than, debating with you in 2002.
That was a long time ago, and I'm not sure how much we actually learned or actually argued very well, but at least it connects to this long-lasting friendship. If that's what it took, I'm happy that we went through it.
Yeah, the debates definitely could have gone better.
So we're here today in your hometown of Las Vegas, Nevada, visiting the former nuclear test site about 80, 70 miles northwest of here. On the podcast today, we're going to reflect on this trip, unfortunately, the only way that I know how, which is to watch a 1994 melodrama called Blue Sky. Clark, did you hear about this movie before I asked you to watch it?
The whole world heard about it, Tim. It's something that we won't forget, and I wish I never saw.
Yeah, I sincerely apologize for this. I was looking for the best movie to talk about nuclear testing, and the other one that I knew of was The Hills Have Eyes, and I rewatched that to see if there was something I'd recommend you to see, and that was a little bit of a disgusting kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre meets nuclear radiated mutants. I decided this one was better.
Both are horror movies in my eyes, Tim.
Yeah, well, this film, it's set in 1962, near the end of the era of above-ground nuclear testing, so testing in the atmosphere, either in a desert or out in the ocean. And you have a nuclear family hopping around between nuclear test sites and Alabama military bases while juggling family crises, emotional distress, and government cover-ups of nuclear tests gone wrong. Clark, will they be able to roll with the tide, or will the combination of radiation leaks and societal pressures be too much to overcome?
I think it's too much to overcome.
Yep, I mean, that's what it felt like getting through this film.
Felt like homework, Tim.
But some people really liked it. I mean, it was directed by an Academy Award-winning British filmmaker, Tony Richardson. Got 77% in Rotten Tomatoes. That's not too bad. It grossed $3.4 million. It ended up with an Oscar for Best Actress for Jessica Lange. But I guess it had a little bit of a unique production in the sense that it was finished but not released for a couple of years because Orion Studios went under, and it took so long to release it, the director actually passed away before it made it into the theaters. But nonetheless, it made it in front of your eyeballs, and you're able to check it out. So let's run through the plot here. We're going to kind of use this as a shell to talk about our trip to the Nevada test site, but there's some interesting things in this movie, and it's a little bit hard to find. I didn't find it any sort of streaming service. I think you said you found it on Vudu.
On Vudu, and then, of course, you could find illegal pirate copies on YouTube.
So check those out. I don't think anyone's going to be. I don't think Orion Studios is going to be chasing us down for this money.
I don't think the lawyers are coming after you for those.
So the way we'll do this one, because we're kind of hanging out in our hotel room, we actually have to finish this before we end up having to check out in a couple hours. Let's do what I'm calling a casual conversation, a nuclear fireside chat. Well, we'll go through the plot. We'll interject some nuke discussions here and there, our trip to the Nevada test site, and then we'll close out with some concluding thoughts. How about that?
Sounds good.
So let's talk about the movie. The movie opens on a woman named Carly, who is played by Jessica Lange, sunbathing topless on a beautiful beach atoll, while her husband, Army Major Hank Marshall, played by Tommy Lee Jones, hovers above in a helicopter. That's quite a way to start this movie.
Yeah, it was interesting. I don't really understand it still, why that was how the movie started. She's sunbathing in waters that may have been subject to a nuclear test.
Yeah, we learned that this is where they were going to do or had done or were currently doing some kind of nuclear
It's
test.
very bizarre. I don't know how to really understand what happened there.
Well, funny enough, there is some fun connections to being on a beach in a swimsuit and nuclear stuff. The actual name for the bikini itself, not the atoll, but the swimwear, came from a Paris-based engineer, Louis Riard. I'm going to France in a couple of days, but I don't speak the language yet. Louis Riard, who in 1946 invented the bikini and wanted to name it after the Bikini Atoll, where many U.S. and French nuclear tests took place. Apparently, he wanted his design to have a, quote, explosive commercial and cultural reaction similar to nuclear detonations.
That is fascinating. I did not know that the name bikini for the clothing came from nuclear testing.
So you know those, before we went to the Golden Knights hockey game.
Yeah, go Knights go.
Before we went to that a couple of days ago, I got a beer, and it's called the Bikini, and on the side of it, it had a little bit of history. So I think I tweeted this out, where it says that Reardon did this because he wanted the nuclear connection to it. But so again, this is a bit of history that it's kind of interesting, but no one talks about it on a day-to-day basis.
I am born and raised in Las Vegas. My mother was here when they were doing the testing. I knew nothing about all of this atomic stuff we have going on until this trip the last couple days. It's impressive. We're on theme the whole week.
Pretty much.
Here, yeah.
So let's keep on theme of the movie, which is issues of radiation leakages and problems with nuclear testing. So Hank, he's out there. This is a weird scene. Looking for radioactive metals in the sand using like metal detectors.
At the same beach where his wife was just in the water.
Right.
I think.
It's hard to tell whether it was before,
it's
after,
not
or
clear
during.
at least. Right.
Maybe she caused the test. Maybe she's the one that's radioactive. It's unclear, really.
Yeah.
But, so they're going around. They're like looking for metal in the sand, kind of like you would be looking for like loose change or like a ring or something. And they find some metal, and the Geiger counters indicate that there's some kind of radiation there. And I think Hank goes back and complains that he's got a radiation leak on base. Honestly, I don't really understand what's happening there. If it's in the Pacific, it's probably an open air test. So the idea that there's a radiation leak on base doesn't really make a lot of sense because it's an above ground test. It's not like an underground test where there's venting or anything like that. Maybe they would say that they tested further away and now there's fallout. But if they're looking for metal pieces, kind of a little bit of a duh moment. If you're going to put up a tower and you're going to blow up something, there's going to be some radioactive residue left there.
Well, and the other thing is they're in Hawaii, correct?
Well, I think that's where the family's stationed, but they're doing the test out in the South Pacific.
Okay. It's a little, again, confusing.
They don't really spell it out too much. Now, perhaps, like I mentioned, maybe it was fallout. There is some real history here. Hundreds of native inhabitants of the Marshall Islands, for example, were evacuated after Castle Bravo, which is a famous test for huge explosion, way larger than they thought it would be. It caused a fallout pattern which irradiated a small fishing boat, the Lucky Dragon, which caused several of the crew members to get sick and ended up passing it on. But that wasn't really about metal pieces on an island, so I'm not really sure.
Right. Hank's boss at the base, moving the plot forward, comes in and has a problem with the fact that his wife is sunbathing.
Right.
And causing too much attention. And for some reason, there is a delegation from, I think, basically what would now be the European Union.
I think they were saying NATO.
Okay.
Yeah.
From NATO. Yeah. And Carly is entertaining all of these people as if there aren't official people to do those types of jobs.
Right.
It's very bizarre.
Well, it's an interesting character introduction, plus the nude sunbathing to Carly. So Carly is Hank's wife. She appears to be, first, just an incredible free spirit, right? Someone who is very outgoing, makes friends easily, loves to dance to music, and she gets the attention of men, whether it's other soldiers or it's delegates from NATO,
right,
or it's commanding officers. But Hank, he's embarrassed by it, but he doesn't shut it down. He just said this is not a way for this to work. Hank's given I guess kind of a promotion after doing this testing in the South Pacific. He's sent to Alabama.
Right. It's not much of a promotion to go from Hawaii to Alabama. Right. I live in Birmingham, so I should be qualified to do this, and I've done a honeymoon in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Hawaii's pretty nice.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Well, Carly didn't like it either. She gets to her new house in this fictional Fort Matthews in Alabama. I believe this was actually filmed in Selma, Alabama, at Craig Air Force Base, which is not it's not even active anymore. I don't think it was maybe even active at the time. It's now basically a civilian airport. Never had a nuclear mission, but that's okay. It's a stand-in for, I'm not really sure exactly what, because, and I'm not sure if we actually based any of our testing operations out of Alabama during the Cold War. I couldn't find any reference to some sort of function of that. That's not really where we did it, but okay.
I think it's a plot device.
Sure.
Right.
So they go down to Alabama. They had previously, the family had been in Germany. They mentioned Hawaii and Washington, D.C. They really, really hated Washington, D.C.
It's that Potomac fever.
Yeah.
You know?
So Carly didn't like this. She kind of has a little bit of a freak out. She steals the family car. She drives into a bunch of stuff. She goes into this dress shop and irrationally worried at one point that Tommy Lee Jones is irradiated. It's clear that either she has some sort of bipolar disease, maybe some sort of an emotional distress issues, something.
Or she likes to sunbathe in radiated oceans.
That might do it.
That could have caused this. They don't really talk about that much, though.
Yeah. The family, there's two girls, an older girl and a little bit of a younger girl, and they kind of comment that this has happened before. This happens again and again. Tommy Lee Jones, eventually he calms her down, and they go back home. And there's this great conversation where the dad is having a breakfast with the two girls, and the girls think he's making excuses for Carly. And the dad explains this whole situation using what he calls, quantum mechanics.
I've come to realize that what we call love is really the exchange of energy over time. It's simple quantum mechanics. You take water, for example. Sometimes it's water, sometimes it's ice. Sometimes it's steam. It's always the same old H2O. It only changes its properties. Your mother's like that. She's like water. I made a decision a long time ago just to love her. Basic properties. Little did I realize I'd gone nuclear fission in that water. Get it? Get it? I made a pun. And with nuclear fission, it's a pun.
You're right, Dad.
I guess I don't know if that's a good explanation.
I think it's a classic dad technique of trying to explain things in the most confusing way possible so your kids stop asking questions.
Right. I mean, it worked. I think what also shut down the conversation was his bad dad pun.
It's a Tim-level pun.
Well, it's the kind of puns that my wife hates where I have to force a word to change into another word.
Right.
I am trying to get better at it.
Some would say you're working too hard on that pun.
Everyone has hobbies.
Right.
So the older daughter, you can see, is a little more distant from the mother, and the younger daughter is a little more forgiving, right, of the mother's mental health issues. That's the family dynamic. Let's get back to the nuke stuff. Hank meets his new commanding officer on base, Colonel Vince Johnson.
Powers Booth.
Powers Booth. I love Powers Booth.
With a name like Powers, you know what this character's like.
Right. So he compliments Hank on his prior great work, but he also kind of tells Hank, hey, look.
We've got a nuclear test program. It's become something of a political football. And I just don't like to see us getting kicked around.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that.
I mean, if this damn test ban is ratified, Majors, you and me are slated to be among the first to get our butts kicked.
As I understand it, if the test ban is ratified, we simply abandon atmospheric tests and go underground. Given some of the test results I've been looking at, I think that's the way to go.
Well, I can appreciate that. But we're a team here. We have to present one consistent point of view. You can understand that. You're a soldier.
Yes, sir. I'm a soldier, and my duty is science.
Well, I'm just reminding you that we work for the Army, not the AEC or Congress or popular science. You understand?
Yes, sir.
Well, good. It'll be all, Major.
So I think what they're referring to is the limited nuclear test ban, which would ban testing in the atmosphere, underwater, in space, anywhere except underground. There was already then there's a couple other test bans, things like threshold test ban, the partial test ban treaty, which set a limit of 150 kilotons for a test. There's the big one, which is still in signature. Hasn't entered into a force yet. You need a few more ratifications, including the United States, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which would ban all forms of testing. This is where you and I have a little bit of connections, right? Because we did debate topics, and we talked.
Right.
We did the CTBT as a debate topic. But anyways, they don't really say exactly what it is, but it seems like it's driving testing underground, which Hank likes. But Colonel Johnson says we all want to keep the program going, and we want Hank to be a team player. Don't make waves.
Right.
don't vent about this issue
Ha!
to your superiors. Let's go to a picnic on base, and we're introduced to a couple more characters, and this is great. Holy Juvenile Batman, that is a young Chris O'Donnell
So young.
in this movie. It's maybe one of his first films.
He was a child.
First, you're like, oh yeah, that's Chris O'Donnell. Well, he is Vince Johnson's Powers Booth's son. In this movie, I think the older daughter of Hank starts to be a little smitten with him.
It's a spring fling, Tim.
Unfortunately, also Colonel Johnson and Carly meet, and at least on Colonel Johnson's side at first, there's a bit of an attraction there.
Right.
He likes Carly, and Hank is maybe okay with that, at least in terms of like, oh, he's being very friendly to my wife.
Yeah, there's like a base barbecue party situation, and Carly goes into seductress mode, and Hank doesn't want to dance with her. He wants to talk to the guy from the International Atomic Energy Commission.
Yeah, so that's coming up here. The big dance, right?
Right.
So that one of the big scenes here where this stuff kind of comes to a head is at the big dance on base. Yeah, he's talking to Ray Stevens, is his name, from the AEC, the Atomic Energy Commission, which is now the Department of Energy.
Right.
The AEC guy pushes Hank on underground nuclear testing, kind of like it's an evil concept. At least the movie portrays the shift from above ground testing to underground testing as something that's being forced upon the military and the scientists and all of this. I think that's probably partially true in some degrees. In other ways, it was clear that this was where the political winds were shifting. So I can see the resistance being a true situation here.
As a noob, as it relates to testing things, and I'm sure this was covered during our tour yesterday, what is the difference in the scientific data that you're able to gather from an atmospheric test versus an underground? It seemed like with the underground, you're able to get a lot more science from it.
I think it's probably getting at different things. So above ground tests will show you shock wave. It can show you effects damage, right? It can show you here's how this would impact a can of tuna.
Right.
And in a fallout bunker. Here's how it would destroy a car. Here's how it would destroy a bank vault. Remember,
Turns out bombs blow things up.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things we did was on the tour, we were in Frenchman Flat, which is where they did a lot of the. There's a dry lake bed, which is where they did a lot of the above ground testing. And I think I said like 10 or 20 or so above ground tests, including one of the more famous ones, which was a launch of a artillery gun,
right,
a 15 kiloton warhead. And what they did was they blew up like a bridge, a couple different bridges to find out what the effects
Right, they
would
had
be.
different bridge designs.
So we actually went underneath one of the bridge designs. Right. I thought that was a powerful part of the tour.
The interesting part of that is the attempt to use civil defense in order to design infrastructure that could survive these blasts that could potentially happen from the Soviets. And so having different bridge designs, and I think our tour guide Kevin mentioned that the one that did survive and did the best is one that they had used in Chicago. And then the other bridge designs did not survive. And it was just interesting, like the amount of money, the amount of time to go into something just to blow it up to see what works the best. It was very interesting.
At one point they said, all right, well, some people were asking if we have a bank vault full of money and if nuclear war goes off and starts, what about our money, our paper money, so important to us? Will that survive? And they're like, yeah, we can design a bank vault that will survive. And they showed it to us. And yeah, I mean, I guess so. I guess it looked okay.
It turns out, it's got to be Mad Max. Like you're going to need a flamethrowing guitar. You're not going to need, Ben Franklin on a piece of paper in order to get things done.
Right, exactly. So, it's money currency is in gasoline.
Yeah.
It's not going to be in this. So yeah, that was an interesting little part of the scene here. And the other thing about nuclear testing is that early on, for most of the test, it was to refine and confirm weapon designs as opposed to things like safety testing or ensuring the reliability, making sure these things go off when we want them to. An underground nuclear test will show you that information, which is why I think largely we're comfortable with what's called the Stockpile Stewardship Program, doing science and maintenance on nuclear weapons without physical actual tests. And we are more comfortable doing that, but for reliability. But if we want to build a new generation, a new design of warheads, you would more likely need to actually do real tests to be confirmed that those work, and that the military would be comfortable deploying and fielding them.
So by real tests, you're not talking about the current subcritical tests.
Right.
You're talking about actual explosions
or
shots.
They shots. They talked a lot about subcritical nuclear testing on this. I believe this was at the UH-1 facility. Our tour guide kept describing it as, hey, when we were on the bus, look to your right, there's the stratosphere, right? Right? The stratosphere, this really tall, 2,000?
It's about 2,000 feet. Or, you know what? I think it's about 1,200 feet tall.
Okay, it's a height. It's pretty tall, and then what you do is you can say, all right, that is how deep the tunnel is to go down to where they do these subcritical nuclear tests, where they use a combination of pressure, conventional explosions, lasers to basically see, all right, plutonium, what happens if we mess with it and shape it and all these different things, as opposed to what you would do in a nuclear test, is where you actually you create a critical mass of fissile material. You compact it down so that when neutrons start firing and breaking other atoms, that when those atoms are broken, they create more neutrons, which then explode more atoms, release more energy. That only works when everything's really tight and compact. It compacts from the size of, say, a basketball to the size of a tennis ball. They don't do that in subcritical tests. They basically do everything up to the point of actually calling it a unit with nuclear yield or things like that.
Right.
So you can't really use subcritical testing to design new weapons. Some people say you can, but I think the evidence points to that not being able to work. But you may be able to maintain reliability and safety. I think that's a reasonable assumption.
It also seems like there isn't, with the subcritical, you're not making as much of a loud statement, right? To me, it seems like when the atmospheric tests, which are clearly banned, right, make a huge statement when they go off.
Yep.
We've got this thing. You do it underground, it's not the same.
You get a little tremor.
You do the subcritical, it's, well, you guys are just keeping those weapons up to date.
Well, so this idea of moving nuclear testing from a public awareness,
right.
Whether it's in the movie, it's about fear of radiation and mushroom clouds. We have this conversation a little bit with the older daughter. Back to the movie, Hank's older daughter. I actually don't know her name. I don't think they say it very much. Older daughter, younger daughter.
This actress was also in the movie Airheads,
what?
Which she played Brendan Fraser's girlfriend.
Huh.
Yeah, which was released
trying to make the tape for
prior to Blue Sky, but it was 4 years later filming-wise, and so she was older and playing a love interest of a rock star, and she's a child in Blue Sky despite the fact that it's released afterward.
This is
Orion
crazy.
Pictures going bankrupt is very interesting to me.
Yeah, there's a whole documentary about it that's cool. I think it's on Netflix.
Yeah.
It may be something to recommend at the end of.
Also, Airheads, watch it.
Yes, please. The older daughter, is not really happy with her father and what she does. The father's like, hey, you should go out and meet some new friends on this base. And she says,
Dad, most of your colleagues around here are dedicated to a program of armed nuclear destruction.
If you have a problem with subcretins, don't sit at home and complain about it. Go forth and enlighten them.
Yeah, maybe I'll start the first Teams for Test Band Club. That should make me real popular around here.
Run away from home and change your name first.
Yeah, it'd be very well attended at the base.
Yeah, probably not so much, but you know what? I'm going to plug a little real-life action here. The CTBTO, which is the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, that actually will help to implement the verification system as well as the treaty. They have a youth club, which was launched in February of 2016. I am a member. I'm not too active in the DC chapter, but I like to see what's happening. This engages students and younger generations to push for the ratification and illegal entry into force of the treaty. So, hey, if this movie and this conversations inspire the youth that listen to the podcast to join, there actually is a way to do it. Go out and check that out. Back to the dance that you referred to earlier. So Hank is chatting up the guy from the AEC, and he hears a little joke, right? Hank hears these military officers joking about JFK being too weak. I think they call him like a little Harvard man, and that he should just let the military do their job. And Hanks makes this little joke, right?
Right. He says, "To hell with Nevada. We'll use Havana as a test site." Ha! Ha!
That's funny.
Oh.
We'll just start testing on a bunch of people. Now, what do you think? Do you think this was a joke that he made, like kind of another dad joke? Or was this something that's a core belief of his?
It's hard to tell. We think Hank is more of an academic and more interested in the science. And so when he's around these military guys with all their bravado, sometimes he's got to falsify his own.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it seems like he's kind of doing here. Or at least that's how it's portrayed in the movie. But, it's Tommy Lee Jones who's in The Fugitive.
Right.
You know, like it's like he's playing a nerd that's not cool, and I don't really understand that.
Would you say he's being a little two-faced in this situation?
That's good.
A little.
That's good.
Yeah?
Good.
All
That's
right.
good.
I apologize for that one. Hank, people know that he writes on this. He wants underground testing to happen because he's concerned about radiation leakages and things like that. But what Colonel Johnson is concerned about is inappropriately dancing and hitting on Carly.
Yeah.
Which he does, and Carly responds in kind, right?
Right.
Hank doesn't like dancing, and she does.
It's very awkward for the audience to see.
Yeah.
Because Carly is dancing very seductively with Powers Booth. And Hank wants to just talk about underground testing. You know, he is doing the right thing at this barbecue. It is a work barbecue. He is there to talk about work and be a serious man. But his wife, who doesn't like Alabama, is trying to make friends, trying to be her best self, trying to let her personality flow, and she lets it flow a little bit too much.
And Hank does not like this very much. He picks her up, carries her out of the room, and throws her in a pool.
A nice dip.
So as someone yourself,
right,
who and his wedding, which I guess is a tradition,
was in Alabama.
Yeah, in Alabama, you got tossed into a pool,
right,
in your tux. How did that make you feel?
Refreshed.
Yeah. So it was a welcome refresher.
It obviously depends on the context. If it were my wife somehow gaining the strength of 5 men being able to pick me up and throw me into the pool because I was dancing seductively with Powers Booth,
right,
it would be a little awkward.
But what a story.
But maybe I should do that and see what happens.
I think we threw you in the pool because you were dancing poorly.
No doubt. I don't think the wet clothes helped with the dancing afterwards.
No. Well, in the movie though, Hank and Carly get home. They have a little bit of a fight, but so kind of a little bit of a twist. They end up getting intimate.
Yeah.
So it's clear that Hank and Carly have a, let's just say, disputed, complicated relationship with these issues.
They run hot and cold.
Right. Well, let's get back to the office. So Hank and Colonel Johnson are in a room. They're having this conversation about how the Russians have started to test their weapons again.
We just got word that some seismologists in Finland have detected evidence that the Soviets have detonated an above-ground device.
Well, the brass must be thrilled. We're off the bench and back in the ball game.
Everything we do from now on becomes that much more vital. Those bastards push in a pile of chips. We better be able to raise the bet, right?
Right.
We can maximize our opportunities real quick. Especially you. As of 0800 hours Friday 4/28, you are TD-wide Operations HQ at the Nevada test site in Mercury.
So Hank is sent to Nevada, to the Nevada test site for 2 weeks.
Vegas, baby.
Yep. So this used to be called, the facility that we went to, now it's called the Nevada National Security Site. It used to be called the Nevada Test Site. I've always talked to people who work there at the higher administrative levels, like at conferences and things. They always say they don't like to be called the test site anymore.
Why is that?
Obviously, they don't do real nuclear testing anymore. They do other things. They do things like environmental research. They do a lot of stuff with the Department of Homeland Security. They do trainings on incident response. So they do a lot more. But our tour guides were saying, no, we're very proud of the fact that we were called the Nevada Test Site, and that's what they refer to it, amongst family and friends.
Right.
So anyways, Hank gets sent over there, and he's concerned that the reason he's being sent over there is not because he had a great conversation with the guy from the AEC. It's because he thinks Carly is going to be hit on by Colonel Johnson.
Powers is removing the impediment to his romance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's a concern that Hank has.
A valid concern.
To be fair to Carly, I think her character is, she tries to strike this balance between what she sees as what society is pushing her towards. At the beginning of the movie, when she's sunbathing, she's flipping through all these magazines, and they're showing people in this outfit with this kind of personality and this kind of hair and all this. So she's trying to meet that. There's a conversation very briefly that she ran away from home, so she had some home issues. I think she was from originally somewhere in Virginia, so being back in the South is probably not so good for her.
Sure.
And she's also being told how to act as a traditional military wife, someone like Colonel Johnson's wife, who's befriends Carly when they first get on base. She's struggling with that, and I think that's probably adding to the pressure here.
Right.
But anyways, we let's cut to the budding romance of Chris O'Donnell and the older daughter. I guess kids do this nowadays. They start chatting in this weird abandoned room on base. They start talking about the title of the movie, Project Blue Sky.
Yeah, it turns out that nowadays we're all concerned about kids texting each other inappropriate things, but in the '60s they were just going into rusty metal closets and making out and stuff and finding what they thought would be grenades that were duds and just throwing them around for fun, making explosions happen everywhere.
Oh, yeah, I don't think that was how Chris O'Donnell imagined that get together to go.
No.
Before this grenade goes off, when the kids get caught and everything, they talk about Project Blue Sky, which I guess I'm not really 100% sure what this is. It's some kind of military code program that Hank is working on, and it seems like what they're saying is that we'll test weapons underground. And we won't be concerned if there's venting where radiation will leave the ground. We're supposed to, if this is done well, there's little to no radiation that leaves the ground. We talk a little bit about how they do that because we heard about that on the tour. The whole point of Project Blue Sky is, hey, no one would care because they can't see it.
Right.
It's largely a made-up term, at least. I'm sure this idea was out there. Hank's not really practicing very good information security, leaving documents around at home.
You think Jared Kushner has some security clearance problems? Hank, come on, man.
Then we go to what people are here for the podcast, right? We get some underground nuclear testing scenes. Hank is out in Nevada. He is laying down wires. He's getting the test looking just right. He's in a helicopter going around checking to make sure everything's okay. The ground test station that they show in the film, like basically the control point, which is the term for the real life, it's a little dark. Right. All these scenes, I don't know why they always have to add atmosphere by making things dark. People, when you're working, dark rooms are not helpful.
Right.
It's the same thing with the Situation Room in The West Wing. It's always like this dark room where the only lights are two little dim lights above the table.
It's for drama, Tim.
Well, it gets me going. And this test happens, and here's a problem. There are two cowboys just kind of going on a stroll.
Oh, yeah.
Standing by. Final lock decision procedure complete.
What the hell is that?
Let's take a peek.
Base station, this is Rat Side 2. We have two civilians on horseback heading right towards site.
Punch up a camera on those cowboys.
Base station, base station. We gotta get them out of there. Please advise. We cannot detonate. Abort the test.
It's too late.
It's venting.
Radiation's right off the scale.
Base station, this is Rat Side 2. We have massive radiation venting in Sector 4.
There's no turning back from testing this weapon that we could test anytime we want.
Yeah, we can do it tomorrow.
Right.
So the test happens, and sure enough, there's venting.
Right.
You see this explosion. You see gas kind of fly up. I guess this whole scene was filmed. You knew this in Texas.
Yes.
Right. So not out in Nevada. But the cowboys, they get cooked. Is how they describe it. Hank says he's run the numbers. He knows how this stuff works. These guys are irradiated and they're going to pass away unless we get to them right now.
Right.
But the military, the testing officials, they're not interested in having that conversation. They're like, they knew the risk. We advertised it in all the papers that I'm sure the cowboys read.
Right. The cowboys are getting the newspaper delivered to their ranch.
Exactly.
In 1962.
When you're out on the farm, how many local notices are you reading?
Well, Tim,
other than Farmer's Almanac.
Every morning I read my Farmer's Almanac, but you don't see much posted. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. Though you would think that they would have more operational security at the Nevada test site than they did, with these cowboys just strolling along.
Well, we learned that for a long time they didn't have fencing
around
the
correct.
area, and now they do.
Right.
There is times where cattle were raised on the test site, and some of it was to do some, what I thought was some pretty graphic experiments with cows, basically putting a hole in their outside so you can reach into their stomachs and do stuff.
It's just a standard bovine study.
I mean, apparently, right?
Yeah, it's pretty normal.
So you do the...
I do not do that, but I know veterinarians do that. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
So maybe they were involved in that. The cowboys are in some trouble, and this reminded me of an incident that took place, probably one of the most significant venting incidents in U.S. nuclear testing history. It's called the Bainbury incident, Bainbury being the shot code name for this. Happened in December 18th of 1970. It was at the Nevada test site. A 10-kiloton device was detonated 270 meters below the surface, but a large cloud of radioactive dust vented out into the atmosphere from the underground test. And this was a really big deal. The cloud could be seen as far away as Las Vegas. Not really something you want to see when it's an underground nuclear test. We had stopped doing above-ground nuclear tests in 1963, so this was a pretty significant deal. And according to the National Cancer Institute, the atmosphere venting incident that took place was 80,000 curies of radioactive iodine-131. Pretty bad, more than any other underground nuclear test. The fallout covered 86 of the test site workers. And while the Department of Energy at that time said no one was hurt, 2 workers died a couple years later, 4 years later, of leukemia. Their widows sued the government. It was a real big case. Eventually, in 1996, the U.S. Court of Appeals found the U.S. government to be negligent, but they concluded that Bainbury didn't cause the illnesses. Testing stopped for 6 months while there was an investigation. These are incidents that definitely took place, and we and part of the tour actually got to see Bainbury. At least they pointed it out off in the distance, kind of where it was. We did see what was the Sedan test,
Right.
which was a gigantic, what they called civilian nuclear test. It was a test to show that you could use nuclear explosions, not nuclear weapons, but like devices to do construction projects, right? Dams.
It was interesting.
Yeah, the Sedan test of the plowshares program,
Right.
turning your swords into plowshares. It was a controversial idea. It kind of came a little bit out of the Atoms for Peace idea. Will give developing countries nuclear technology and all the things that they would need to have, like a reactor, an enrichment program, all these things, in exchange for support in the Cold War.
Sure.
And we would thought, hey, look, if this incredible force can be harnessed for good, and the United States is the one promoting this technology, it's good for business, it's good for diplomacy, let's get it going. But as the Sedan test showed, the amount of radiation leakage that happened, it wasn't as bad as an atmospheric test, but it's clearly not the kind of thing you want to do when you're building things like a dam or river projects or the Panama Canal, for example.
What I thought was interesting about the Sedan test was that apparently the federal government was really interested in the feasibility of this because Kennedy himself came and visited the site.
Yeah, they did like 26, 27 of these tests over time.
The idea that you would use a nuclear device to build a canal is just beyond odd to me.
Yeah.
Because we think about the destructive capabilities of these devices, and you don't think about their feasibility or usefulness.
Well, so India, when they tested in 1974, they called their test a peaceful nuclear explosion.
Right.
They basically, like the Sedan test. So they said, hey, don't come after us for nuclear weapons. We're not building nuclear weapons. We're building construction tools.
Right.
And the Russians actually did a great number of these tests for construction projects. They used to use nuclear explosions to stop oil wells that had caught on fire and they can't shut them off. They'll dig a tunnel nearby and they'll set off the explosion. It will cause the ground to collapse onto the tunnel where the oil is coming out. So they use these things. We just never actually used them for projects. We just tested the feasibility of it and decided against it. Apparently other countries...
that reminds me, I'm not going to be doing any sunbathing in Sochi.
Fair enough.
I'm concerned about that.
That's a good call.
Yeah.
Good call. So Hank, he is in a bar. He's drinking with one of his coworkers, and he says he wants to underline to everybody that's listening, he's not going to forget.
It's a crime.
Your work's done here. Forget about it.
It's a goddamn crime, and I am going to forget precisely nothing. And no one.
Unfortunately for him too, back at home base in Alabama, his worries about Carly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they were true. I mean, Colonel Johnson puts some serious moves on her. She reciprocates. They have an affair. But unfortunately for them, they get caught, right?
And again in the Quonset. In this rusty metal place is where all these people are going to be inappropriate. It doesn't make any sense. They're adults, Tim. They could do things where they want.
Well, they got to go to a place where their kids aren't going to be noticed, but they go to the place where their kids
where their kids go to play.
Yeah.
And so the kids find out.
Carly is kind of pushed by the daughter, the older daughter, to tell Hank about the affair. Hank's not too pleased, but he kind of feels like this has happened before. It's certainly not the first of these incidents.
Powers Booth is really messing with Hank on multiple levels here. Professionally, he is not advocating or seeing eye to eye with Hank as it relates to underground testing. And then at home, he's moving in on his woman.
Right.
It ain't right.
It's not good. And then when Hank gets home, he goes and confronts Powers Booth. It's not about his wife, any of the personal things that he knows that happened. It's about the radiation.
It's about the Cowboys.
Yep, making sure that the Cowboys are taken care of. Colonel Johnson says, I have no interest in this conversation. We're not having this conversation. And then he provokes Hank, making some comments about his wife. That leads Hank to punch his commanding officer and accidentally push Carly through a glass window. She ends up being in the hospital, right?
Was it an accident?
I think it's implied to be an accident.
Right.
I feel like this movie's continually punching me in the face. And a window would be a welcome relief, but not to Carly. She ends up in the hospital.
Right.
Hank talks to Carly and says he just doesn't know if he can go through this again.
He's got a lot of things going through his head.
Well, as he leaves the hospital, now he's got another problem thrown into him. He gets arrested, right?
Oh, that's right. He assaulted an officer.
Yep, and he goes to jail. Colonel Johnson kind of tricks Carly into saying, if you commit your husband to a mental institution, at least he'll get out of jail and he'll get treatment for some sort of a thing. But then
why does he need treatment?
Well, I think it's all a cover-up, right? It's all a way to get Hank quieted about his radiation stories, and also, again, probably to make some more moves on the wife, I'm sure.
Right.
Hank is so heavily medicated when the family goes to visit, he can't even get words out. He can't talk to anybody.
It's a sad sight to see.
It really is.
Brilliant man reduced to rubble, basically.
Yeah, he's not talking about quantum mechanics anymore. He's talking about...
He's not telling fission jokes.
No. And Carly's not happy about it either. She gets in the car, she packs up the kids, and she actually confronts Colonel Johnson. She drives through a military parade. And then she began... because
wasn't arrested, by the way.
No, not at all, which seems like that would solve Colonel Johnson's problems.
All of our problems, really.
And the movie, the end.
Right.
So this actually kind of reminds me a little bit, this whole cover-up story. The idea of heavily medicating someone so that they don't talk about what happened in terms of a venting incident. This reminded me of a couple different situations during the Cold War, as everything does. According to some documents that were recently declassified in 2013 by the GW, George Washington University-based National Security Archive, we found out there was this tacit gentleman's agreement between the U.S. and the Soviet Union to not publicize venting incidents to the media or to cause public protests, so that when this would happen, they would kind of keep it on the down low. Protests were lodged privately between the two sides, and the U.S. really wanted the Soviet Union to make better safety precautions at their site. But when there was these incidents, it was kept quiet and out of the press. These were a lot of memos that were written about in diplomatic discussions. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if they ever went as far as to medicate someone to stop leaks, but this certainly happened.
Do you think it's a metaphor for the moral bankruptcy of power, and more importantly, powers? Right? He is willing to test and get what he wants, no matter the consequences, even if it reduces a good man to rubble. It's interesting to me. Is the filmmaker putting that symbolism in there purposefully, or am I just drawing that out? I don't know.
I think that's a strong... Well, I don't know the name Powers Booth connection,
sure.
But I think you're right about the idea of Colonel Johnson is willing to keep not only his professional activities quiet by putting Hank in this mental institution and medicating him so he can't talk.
Right.
Maybe there's some comment there about how Hank is a brilliant mind, so why don't you just reduce the mind's ability to operate? But he also tries to keep Hank quiet from his personal dealings. I
Right.
think there's a sense that the wife knows, the wife being Colonel Johnson's wife, knows something's up. She knows this happens.
Knows something up in terms of him cheating on her.
Right. I would
Okay.
say that is a reasonable statement to make.
Okay.
Now, the wife blames Carly
Okay.
for some of this happening.
Clearly, she is at fault as well. Right.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. But that's kind of where the double whammy, the 2-for-1 gets it when you put Hank in the hospital. But Carly is trying to get Hank out of the hospital, so she sees all of Hank's work files because Hank does not practice very good informational security. I'm going to give the movie the benefit of the doubt. Probably he illegally copied all these documents so that he could leak them later to the press about the venting incidents. That's kind of how I interpreted that. I don't know
Right.
if I'm just adding things to it.
He's got to go to all those newspapers that no one apparently reads.
Yeah, well, at least not
Or
the,
at least
the
not
Cowboys.
Cowboys.
Well, she gets in the car. She gets all these documents. She sees the documents on Blue Sky and on the testing incident. So she goes to tell the Cowboys. She drives all the way.
It's a long drive.
You've done this.
I've done the drive from Nevada to Alabama twice.
Can you do it as quickly as she did?
It was 1962. I don't know what kind of mileage she got, but it seemed like it was like a Thelma and Louise situation with that she threw the kids in the back of the car and she drove all night and all of a sudden she was there.
Yep.
It was that there's a lot of unbelievable things in this movie, but that was bonkers.
It's unclear if she put on a diaper and did
Right.
one of those kind of drives.
What was that astronaut's name?
I don't remember the name, but I remember it was again some sort of mental health issue.
Here's the thing: whenever I go on a cross country drive, I need my Depends.
So she goes to tell the Cowboys, "Hey, look, here's what happened to you. I know I'm the wife of the person who was running the test." And what are the Cowboys? You have some strong opinions on this. What do the Cowboys respond to this information?
They say, "No, our government said that nothing is wrong with us. We believe our government." That is the second most bonkers thing in this movie because there is no cowboy who has ever said, "I believe anything the government says," and also no Nevada cowboy for that matter.
Oh, there's a particular breed.
Right. We are fiercely independent. In general, that's what we do. We're the Silver State. We're battle born.
Mm-hmm. Your Rebs are running, right?
Right. We run, baby. And these cowboys, they say we trust our government, despite the fact that their faces are legitimately peeling off.
Yeah,
and
it's unpleasant.
It is unpleasant and bizarre. And cowboys aren't like, you know what? I'm really in support of Social Security. I'm really in support of this government program. No cowboy has ever been in support of any program because they like dirt roads. You know, they don't need infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
It's bizarre.
Hey, you're going to move dirt from one place to another with a nuclear test? Good. I didn't want that dirt there anyways.
Right. Yeah, sure. That sounds great. Could I have one of those weapons, to put in a new cow pasture?
Yeah.
No, that's not how cowboys work.
Well, according to the movie, they just don't want to, quote, make a fuss.
Cowboys, all they do is make fusses.
That's their job description.
Yeah, they're fussy. These are the guys that are legitimately riding their horses onto the test site because they don't give a damn, right?
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, they're like, we trust the government. It's bizarre.
It's a little weird. Carly is probably taken aback by it because she is told, hey, get off my property, kind of a whole situation there.
Legitimately, this woman from Alabama comes to a ranch. Which, by the way, the fact that she made it into the door is amazing because,
good
again,
shot, yeah.
These are cowboys.
Yeah.
I'd assume that these cowboys who are fiercely independent, living at a ranch next to the Nevada test site, might maybe shoot someone who just drives onto their property, or maybe a warning shot at the very least.
Well, Carly is able to break down the security of this ranch twice.
Right.
Because the next day, there's this reference one of the Cowboys makes and says, if it's so bad, why are they going to keep testing? They're going to do another test tomorrow at 10 a.m.
He just trusts the government, Tim.
Right. So Carly goes back to the ranch the next morning, steals a horse, and rides out onto the test site. Here's two problems I have with that. One, you guys got to type your horses.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Two, we learned that the vast majority of the nuclear tests that would take place were at like 4:30 in the morning.
Right. Also, the test site, the NNSS, it's the size of the state of Rhode Island, we were told 50 times yesterday during our tour. It is massive.
Yeah.
That is a long ride on a horse, right? I mean, that horse, what time did she leave? How is she getting there? Did she take 3 days to get there, too?
Mm-hmm.
Where are the kids?
Where are the kids?
No one knows.
Well, she has this plan.
She's not a good mother.
Well,
I'll tell you that much.
She has a strategy, right? You know, maybe not a good mother, but maybe she has a she knows how to work the media.
Sure.
So her idea was, right onto the test site, get the test stopped, and this time around, fortunately for her, they abort the test because the press is there.
Excuse me, General. Who's that? Report detonation. Get a squad out there immediately. What the heck's going on?
Right. Also, it was a blonde woman, not, two cowboys.
That'll do it, right?
Yeah. Also, it turns out you could just say, let's not hit that button and we'll hit it, an hour from now or something like that.
Yeah. So they don't hold the test.
Right.
She goes and talks to the press, or at least they take pictures of her and like, what is this woman doing? And her whole plan is she goes to talk to the guy from the Atomic Energy Commission and the Army. I couldn't tell who this person was in the Army, but someone high up. And she says, all right, you need to get Hank out of this mental institution or else I am going to talk to the press.
Right.
I have family connections to the press. They're not buying it. They say, we know who you are. We know you're crazy.
Right.
We know that your family connection isn't all that strong. You are going to get in trouble.
Sure.
And I think this is kind of a funny little thing. The Army tells the press that Carly is a, quote, religious fundamentalist and a communist. Normally those two things don't tend to go together.
And cowboys love the government. There's a lot of things, Tim.
Well, anyway, so she drives back defeated to Alabama. And then the movie really quickly turns on a dime where we see Colonel Johnson and his family sitting watching the news and Carly's on TV. And he goes, oh no, now his plan of keeping this under wraps is starting to fall apart. His son starts to doubt his story about Hank being in the mental institution for national security reasons. And the family has this big confrontation, and Colonel Johnson is getting his comeuppance,
right,
in terms of the family. And he goes to the mental institution and tries to get Hank discharged. I don't really know what, to kill him?
I don't know.
Doing something, right? He's going to discharge him. It's unclear what he's going to do next. But he gets intercepted all of a sudden out of nowhere by another military officer who has been given orders.
The hell are you doing here, George?
I was ordered here, Vince, by General Nierenberg.
To do what?
I was ordered to provide for the safe treatment and the discharge of Hank Marshall. I was also ordered to relieve you as commanding officer, pending further orders, effective immediately.
And arrest Colonel Johnson. Unclear under what charge?
Right.
Maybe some sort of cover-up. Anyways, I guess her plan worked. For somehow, something happened and it worked.
It was just crazy enough to work.
Hank then gets released. He reconnects with Carly. He's no longer sedated, which is pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
He quits the Army. He joins the academic world out in California. He stops promoting nuclear weapons. Everything seems to be great. And the family drives off in a new convertible after Carly dyes her hair to look like Elizabeth Taylor.
Right.
The end.
It seems like it's a happy ending, though.
Yeah.
He's still. I mean, his wife cheated on him. He lost his job. He was put into a mental institution, but he got out.
Yeah. I don't know what his pension's like. I mean, academics don't really make too much.
Yeah.
It's a movie. Let's transition here to what we call our parking lot movie discussion. You and I have been to a couple movies when we were in college.
Sure. Out
in Southern California. Normally we see a movie and then we sit in a parking lot afterwards before we go our separate ways and talk about it. So here, I think this is a good spot to start because, does this movie handle mental illness well? Like, is this a thing where you could say the ending of this movie would indicate to you that the family made some kind of breakthrough in terms of their own internal dynamics? Or are we meant to think this is like a dark comedy of this has happened before, it's going to happen again, this is just one life in the continual cycle of this family? I'm not really sure how we're supposed to interpret these things.
Right. It's hard to say that the movie handles it well. I think, one thing that we probably haven't mentioned is that Jessica Lange, I mean, she did win Best Actress for this. Mm-hmm. She was a tour de force in this
She was
movie.
great.
She was fantastic.
Really, we're not focusing on that, but we should. She's so good in this.
A lot of negative comments toward her character, but she was so good in portraying this character in this character's illness that it made me very upset with her.
Mm-hmm. And that's
So,
good, right? It works.
and I think who is to say if that's an accurate depiction of mental illness? But it definitely seems to be an accurate depiction of people having to deal with someone who's constantly upsetting them and doing things to put them in compromising situations.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, loving them, which is interesting. But I don't like that on one level, Carly's mental illness gets no attention, whereas Hank's gets him put into an institution,
Mm-hmm.
though he has no actual discernible disease. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a commentary on our state of our mental health system
Right.
in America, or it's simply just the movie is playing with these ideas.
Right. It was interesting, that's for sure. But it is. I do like that. You know, they say you could live with these things. The family is going. It seems at the end they're moving on with their lives. For some reason, Chris O'Donnell is also in this convertible. I don't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's the son of the guy who ruined their lives in a way, and yet they're hanging out with that kid.
They are able to recognize that they still love each other.
Right.
That maybe Hank has realized, I guess I can handle more of these problems. The scene we see, the last thing we see Carly do is kind of flirt with Chris O'Donnell a little bit.
Right.
She says, "I've dyed my hair to look like one of my magazines again. I went out and bought a convertible."
Yeah, she's
And
being her
now
best self.
But that's also her worst self, in a way.
Yeah, it's a completely irrational decision. Mind you, she had stolen the family car and got in a car accident. And then she's just going out, buying a car at the end of the movie by herself, not telling anyone about it. We don't know what their finances are like.
No,
we don't know what
again,
they're
he's
doing.
about to join academia.
Yeah,
It's not-
exactly. You know, those government benefits gone.
Right.
You know,
I don't know what to make of it. Maybe we can. Remember, we're meant to interpret it however we want. I interpret it as this is very sad. I don't think
Yep.
anything's going to get any better.
Yep.
You can go through this kind of a crisis with your people who have these kind of emotional distress issues, kind of
Sure.
handling, kind of whether it's borderline personality disorder or bipolar. And you can have these moments of clarity, or maybe just everything's kind of going okay, and then it will fall back apart. None of the underlying issues have been kind of handled all that well. But anyways, maybe that's what the movie is, because in a way, we have to try to connect the nuke stuff to the movie, because I don't think the movie does this great.
right?
A lot of the stuff that I'm about to mention is things that I saw in reviews, contemporary reviews of the film, who said, oh, it's beautiful because, radiation and this family issues are very similar. They're both invisible. They have no warning signs when they're going to flare up. They can cause incredible health problems and internal divisions, and also people are more willing to quiet it, to put it down deep and say, you know what, we have no problems with radiation from the test site. We trust in our government. Also, at the same time, we're not going to talk about our mental health issues or our family problems. We're just going to kind of keep making excuses for this. And you have this story over and over again. These themes keep popping up in the film. And then I was trying to think about, does the movie do this well? What do you think? Do you think that's...
I think it does, but it's kind of like you've made your bed, now go sleep in it. You married Carly.
Mm-hmm.
You know all of her good parts and all of her bad parts, and that is a decision you made. We married the bomb. We have to deal with the way that it's we test it, its usefulness, and all the negative aspects of that. And as a society, you stick with those things, I suppose. And neither of those things get fixed, right?
Yeah, I mean, Carly's her heroic journey, it succeeds in a sense of getting Hank out of, being sedated, almost probably lobotomized at some point. But she saves that. But really, it's a blip on the whole history of nuclear testing. Hank doesn't cause any sort of change.
No.
Apparently, according to the film. Maybe he can do this from academia.
Right.
Although probably there'll be some issues with his clearance and what he can talk about. But it's it's a blip there, and I think you can connect it to the family stuff. I would argue that the way I would interpret this is this little, whatever this moment was in the family, will likely be a blip in their relationship, and we're going to be back to some problems later on.
Sure.
That's how I would maybe say this would end up happening. But let's maybe some concluding thoughts here, maybe connecting some of the things that we maybe thought was interesting of the tour that we went on. I think that's worth maybe bringing up a little bit more. Visually, I think the test site, it was done pretty good in the movie compared to how we saw some of the underground nuclear tests. You see something that I personally really like to see in movies where there's nuclear testing. Lots of cables.
Lots of cables.
Right?
That was the one thing about the test site that I didn't expect.
Cables.
Yeah, cables everywhere. If you're the cable guy for the test site, you've probably got a few vacation homes. You're doing okay.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
A lot of wires, right? So the wires, they will transmit data from the test site, because really, when an explosion happens, it vaporizes everything very quickly, less than a second, way less than half a second. We can go down to lowest levels here, and you have to transmit that information really quickly. And you also have to make sure that there's no radioactive gas that's running through the wires to get back to where they do the testing.
What was that called? A gas lock?
We saw this. It was like a gas block assembly, which essentially was you would connect two wires together, and there would be a seal. I think he said an epoxy seal, our tour guide. Shout out to Kevin, our tour guide, who was a former test worker. He talked a lot about the cables. They try to have as long of a continual one piece as they can with these wires. And again, it was like 300 wires for each of these tests. And when they would dig a hole in the ground, usually a vertical shaft or a long horizontal shaft into like a tunnel, they had the technology eventually to just do a straight tunnel drill down, which I guess the Soviets did not have that technology. Their tunnels were zigzag, all that kind of stuff. Ours were great. So it was just straight down. So you would do that, and then you would have to bury, you would lower the bomb, the casing. I forget what they said. So like Los Alamos and Livermore, the two major national labs that would do testing here, they each had different names for it. One would call it the casing or the cartridge. Maybe I'll look that up and put that in the show notes. Okay. But they would drop down the testing device. You would fill it with a couple different types of, was one, I think it was Magnite. Another one, you would then fill it with coarse sand from the area. Sure. And then you would do more fine sand, and you would put some other stuff on top of that. And all this is in service of preventing radiation from leaking out. But all these wires, right? You had all these wires, and you had to make sure the information was transmitted as quickly as you possibly could before the wires and everything would be vaporized. So I was happy to see that. I was happy to see, like, the trucks where all the monitoring equipment would be. Thought that was really cool. A good demonstration of how this stuff looked.
But again, very dark in the control room.
Why? Why make it so dark?
Yeah.
People can't see the papers.
Yeah, you need intimate lighting for testing.
Maybe that's the thing, is like when Hank calls in and says, abort the test, the guy's like, I can't see the button. We got to make the button glow, guys.
Seriously, someone turn on a light.
Yeah. So that probably was one of the problems. Now, the Pacific test site, visually, what was it filmed? This. It was
filmed
Florida?
in Florida.
Florida.
Yep.
Visually, it looked like an atoll where they would do these kind of tests. But I don't understand what they were doing after the test.
I think they were walking around on the beach with like flamethrowers, or was it already on fire?
It was already on fire. They were going around with metal detectors.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So some of that stuff is great. Other times, it's
which
not so great.
Which is a very common sight on Florida beaches. People with metal detectors.
Absolutely. Yeah. Usually wearing Hawaiian t-shirts and.
Yep. Yeah.
Anyways, so I think visually, I think the movie does a decent job of portraying these things. It portrays venting incidents as a real concern. What were some of the other takeaways you had from our tour that we went on? Like, one of the things that I would stress connection to this movie was the people that work at the test site, they're salt to the earth. Yeah. Most of them aren't scientists. Right. Most of them are construction workers, people who lay down the cables, who dig the holes, there's monitoring involved for sure, but a lot of these people, they wear hard hats, they go to work.
Sometimes no lab coats.
Yeah. And we went to the cafeteria as part of the tour, and we were kind of sitting and having lunch with other people who are at the construction site. And there were people wearing overalls, and they were going around on trucks. Now, they take their job very seriously. They do constant check-ins to make sure no one's in places where it's still hot.
Right.
Everyone makes sure they have their life dose of radiation, making sure their badges and everything, the radiation detection badges are good. But yeah, no lab coats. And I think the movie describes maybe what life would be like for some of the people that work there. You're a scientist, you're in the military, you're doing your test, but you still have a life and a family.
Right.
You still have to live on base, right? They kept talking about how if you paid a little bit of extra money, you can have the same dormitory-like place.
Right. It was an interesting take because you'd think like, oh, they should just have a place off base or something like that.
It takes so long to get there, right?
Right. And again, the site is the size of the state of Rhode Island. It is massive. So there's different sites for homes, if I remember correctly.
Multiple locations,
or dormitories within the test site.
Yeah, so
because it is so big.
Mercury is the big location. It's the front entrance. That's where the basketball court was, right?
Yeah.
That's where the chapel was.
Yeah.
We didn't have a chance to hoop up a little bit, but
game doesn't sleep, Tim.
but it used to be a pool, but I think the other fascinating thing was you can see the test site. A lot of the stuff is very old.
Right.
They haven't done nuclear testing since 1992.
Yeah.
They have a state of readiness that they're required and they maintain, within, say, 2 years.
Sure.
Between a year and a half to 2 years, they can try to get back to testing. It maybe if they need to do just a quick test as a political test to say, hey guys, look, don't mess around with us. We're going to show you our nuclear bombs.
Put a device in the tunnel and let it go. Yeah.
Right. But if it's going to take some time to refurbish everything to get to the more diagnostic, like testing to build new weapons, that will take some time.
Yeah.
And the facilities, at the heyday, there was 10,000 or so people working there. Now, what was the tour guide said? It was like around 1,000, maybe.
It was very sparse.
People will kind of come in and out when they do their different testing. But what they do there now is there was one facility where they would drop chemical spills, and they wanted to see what effects would be. They would. One was they tried to blow up a rail car or a passenger car and see what the effects would be. They do all these different testing. They have this one facility, right, where it's called BEEF. I forget what the acronym stands for.
The big explosive...
Experimental Explosive Facility, maybe?
Yes.
And you know this because there's like a cow, like a memorial cow out there that they painted up and stuff. But that's where they do just big explosions to see what the effects would be.
Right.
So they do a lot of things there now that aren't testing, but still are good science, and it's stockpile stewardship.
Right.
Just the way it needs to work.
I was impressed with it. Did make you feel like, not to sound like a cowboy who trusts his government, but that our government is doing things to prepare for every disaster situation that they could try to think of.
Mm-hmm.
And that was impressive because you have to have a place to do that. And a facility the size of the state of Rhode Island in a very, very barren part of the Nevada desert is a great place to do that.
In terms of preparation, people who listen to the podcast, when we did our episode on Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, there's this famous scene where Indiana Jones is like in this made-up like Potemkin village where they make up essentially like a 1960s, 50s homes, and they blow it up. They want to see what the effects would be. Now, those tests were based on a series of actual effects tests for civil defense, and we talked a lot about in the Apple II homes that were there as part of a series of tests. We actually got to see those.
We drove right by one.
I'm not going to lie to you. That was a moment I dropped my jaw of just seeing like the visual. I've seen this in pictures and in video so many times. I wanted to tell the house, I saw your paint in a thermal blast evaporate into the air and then get pushed away.
Right.
I've seen that.
Yeah, it was
there.
Seeing you there, you were in like your Disneyland in a very bizarre way, obviously. But it was impressive to see all of your knowledge of what we were already seeing, because as me, I'm a lay person as it relates to these things. I know like the pop cultural references, but I didn't remember the Apple II test, but I knew that house. I knew the mannequins. But I didn't actually understand the purpose of those tests just until I had been there, and seeing that, it was crazy to see.
Yep.
And that a certain distance away from where the device was detonated, that a house, if designed correctly, engineered correctly, could withstand the blast. As long as you're not near the windows, you might be okay. Obviously, radiation is going to be a bit of a pain. But in terms of the initial survival rate, you have a chance. Probably not with a massive weapon, obviously.
This one I think was, I want to say it was like a 50 or to 100 kiloton, and it was a ground burst, so it wasn't like an air burst where these explosions are larger areas. But here's what we talked about preparation. I did not know this. So the ground point, literally ground zero for where this tower shot test took place for the Apple II homes, as part of this particular test, where that ground zero was now is a training center called T1 Training Area. And that's where they have things like they broke up an airplane. They cut it up and they made it look like it was just had crashed.
Right.
And they'll say, all right, there is irradiated material in this airplane. First responders who are coming here from the United States or from abroad to come train, go find it.
Right.
There is actual radiation here. You wear your radiation protection suits. You do all these things. and they have all these different little areas. So they have like train cars, they have buses, and they have just things there to do these trainings. And I thought that was amazing that it's being done at the ground zero of where these effects tests were taking place. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, that is very interesting. That 50 years ago, that's where we were doing these effects tests, and now the mission has changed so much in a way. Yeah, I'm
trying to think if there's one or two other things that we can kind of mention. People should go on this tour if they can.
You have to schedule it about a year in advance.
Yeah, you go on the website. It's a free tour.
Yeah.
You have to meet up at the National Atomic Testing Museum, which is
Tim's other Disneyland.
Yeah, exactly. We were like, oh, what are we going to do on this trip? And it's like, well, you can always go back to the testing museum. That would be kind of fun. I think instead we went to a couple other places in the area. One of which I'm really happy you brought me here, because I read about this place a number of times, but never actually been to it. The Atomic Liquors, which was started in the 40s, and then kind of when nuclear testing caught on, starting in 1951 with the Nevada test sites when it was their first detonation. This place, the Sobchak family, decided, hey, let's get in on that. We're just a liquor store. I think they were flipping burgers, and they're like, let's call ourselves Atomic Liquor.
Right.
Let's start to sell some drinks to go, and then then they got their liquor
license. It's a package
license.
store, right?
Yeah. And then it became today this pretty great dive bar. Kind of awesome.
It's I'm from Las Vegas, but wasn't much of a reason for a long time to go down to Fremont Street.
Yeah, so it's not on the Strip or anything. It's pretty far away from that.
Yeah, it's old downtown Las Vegas, and Zappos moved their headquarters to downtown Las Vegas a couple of years ago, and there's been a pretty immediate revitalization of that area, and Atomic Liquors has definitely kept up and improved itself, and it's just like a cool place to go hang out.
Yeah,
and,
I like that place.
And it's on theme,
Yes.
like they do it right there. I liked it, and the drinks are good. And oddly enough, one of our college roommates is a bartender there. That we didn't know that. Right.
What a small world this nuke stuff is.
Right.
But yeah, this is the place I think I mentioned on our Indiana Jones episode one of those places that used to serve what was called the Atomic Cocktail, which was like mixes of. I think it has like gin and rum and a lot. It's pretty good. They don't serve it anymore, which that was interesting. But they had enough other nuke drink things all around town. We kept going to these different bars where, one of them was called the Atomic Duck,
right?
Which was based. It's a brewery
by Abel Baker Brewery.
Another nuke thing out in Henderson, Nevada. And then there was another one that we went to. I had the bomb drink, which was another kind of. I don't think it was nuclear, but it was bomb themed things. And then when we were at the Go Knights Go Golden Knights hockey game,
Go Knights.
We had a signature cocktail. It was called the Atomic Fizz, and it was like a mixture of like 7 or 8 different things. It was actually served out of a tap.
Sure.
And it was a signature cocktail. It was an homage to the roots of Nevada in Las Vegas in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, all that stuff. It was pretty good.
Yeah.
It was kind of fun. So even in this hockey environment, which was it was really decked out to look like I'm not saying this in a mean way, like medieval times set up, Game of Thrones style setup in terms of the intro and everything. Even in that world where we're talking about Golden Knights and all this stuff, I got to have an atomic themed beverage served to me out of a tap.
Right.
So I don't know any other better way to conclude our conversation here. Is there anything else you want to draw from the tour that you remember?
I liked the aspect that it was very blue collar. You think about the people that work on the test site, and you think about people that are all scientists that have to keep everything secret, and ultimately, like we've discussed before, there's people who have to lay the cables. There's people who have to do that, and it was just very approachable that way. Like, it didn't seem like testing was all that foreign or something that was actually all that secretive in a way. I don't know. It kind of made it more approachable, which was interesting.
With satellites, we know when other countries are doing tests. I mean, we can see there's telltale signals. Yeah. Sometimes we can be surprised when North Korea does something, but usually you see some activity on a test site, you see another hole being drilled, you can kind of pick this stuff out. If anything, you almost advertise sometimes that you're doing a test because you want the other people to know your activity is still ongoing.
It's a statement. Yeah.
It is a fascinating idea that it's not nuclear testing was not just a scientific endeavor. It was also an engineering feat. They had to invent new ways of doing construction and deep or what do they call
deep drilling.
Big hole drilling.
Yeah.
all that stuff. So that's
I think one of the movies that they had us watch on the bus, they said that they started out with the ability to drill like 18-inch holes in terms of diameter, and the last one, the diameter of the hole was 98 inches, and it went down 1,300 feet, if not more. That's a big hole.
Yeah, and straight down.
And the application of that technology to other industries, I mean, who knows?
Yep. And this is, you can criticize us for our we're not really, I'm trying not to gush about this, because you can have a conversation about, an opinion on nuclear testing as, whether it's good or bad. And I'm a proponent of never testing again until there's a military necessity. But it's really, we can do this without testing.
Right.
In a world where I'm an advocate of getting rid of nuclear weapons, there's some real concern people have about how the nuclear test site area was procured.
Right.
Likely taken by force from some the Western Shoshone kind of Native American reservations in the area. All those things are true, while still kind of learning through this tour that there are people who worked at this site and they have opinions that I don't necessarily always agree with, but I appreciated the fact that they were so open, in some ways surprisingly open about some of the activities that they were ongoing. But I think you can all kind of tie this together. At the same time this week, the Peace Walkers, who were walking from the Atomic Museum all the way. They walked. We took a bus for an hour.
They started at the museum?
They started. That was one of the locations for.
Wow.
I think they started on Saturday, and our tour was on Tuesday, and we saw them walking.
That's a 65-mile trip.
Yep. And people get together. They do it in big groups. Some of them camp. Other ones have homes that they do. And these are people who are protesting things like drone warfare, nuclear testing, nuclear test site, all these different opinions. We came at the right time for all of these things. But now we have to be shallow again, and we have to do our rating system for the movie, not for the test site. We usually like to rate things 1 out of 5, so it's consistent across all of our movies, so we can compare these things. But because we get super critical about the content, we also give attention to detail to our tailored rating system. So I think I've crunched the numbers on this one, and I think I want to do 1 out of 5 hours sunbathing on a nuclear test site, because 1 hour won't really get you much of a tan, but 5 hours you'll be practically glowing. It'll be great. So how many out of 5 hours sunbathing on a nuclear test site would you give this particular film, Clark?
Probably 1.
Really, that bad?
It felt like homework. It was a good movie in terms of trying to discuss a very serious topic and how it relates and has an effect on family lives. But I would not want to watch it again. Jessica Lange was really good. I know that it's not the most fun and enjoyable movie to watch.
Well, I'm going to give it a 2.5. I would say good performances for sure, as we mentioned. The plot has not really aged all that well, and it's all over the place. The last 20 minutes of the movie, I don't know what's happening.
It was as if someone just said, wrap it up.
Done, yeah. It was as if they ran out of money.
Yeah.
And Orion Pictures is like, hey guys, we got to get this going.
Probably is what happened.
Yeah. So who knows why things happen in the film, and that it's very distracting. There are moments of this movie I was enjoying.
Yeah.
And then it kind of fell apart, and it's one of those things do I recommend this to anybody? Maybe not, but if you can get your hands on it and you enjoyed this conversation here, hey, maybe check it out. There's some good scenes there.
Yeah, do it.
But speaking of things that I would recommend, we like to normally recommend a couple things for people to check out. If you like this, check this out. Not really homework, but it's got some stuff for you to look it up. I have 3 things. So, Clark, maybe you've got some stuff you can mention here.
Sure.
I recommend a book called The Atomic Times, My H-Bomb Year at the Pacific Proving Ground by Michael Harris in 2005. It is a really good story. Someone who spent a year at a test site. You can kind of see all the different things that go on, for whether it's family dynamics of how people live when they're working on these sites, and also some of the work that was done there. It's a good book to check out. If you don't like to read, check out the 1988 documentary Radio Bikini, directed by Robert Stone, also nominated for an Academy Award. It's about the nuclear test at the Bikini Atoll during Operation Crossroads in the 1940s, and it covers a lot of different areas, but its main interest is the impact of these tests on the indigenous population and the test site workers. Kind of a landmark film. I believe it's still on Netflix, so it might be easy to check out. And finally, I recommend a television program. I think this is on Netflix, called Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. It stars Rachel Bloom. It's kind of a comedic tale of a woman who has severe mental health issues. She has borderline personality disorder, and she is obsessed with this person she had a fleeting relationship with in high school and grade school, maybe even. She meets up with him in New York, follows him to West Covina, California, which is very close to where he went to college, very close to where I went up. So I thought I enjoyed all the personal references.
Sure.
But the whole thing is done. There's lots of musical numbers, at least 2 per episode, and they're always funny. They're always like these stream of consciousness, story within a story things. But I think I would recommend that this handles mental health issues, and someone who is very smart. She's a lawyer. She's very brilliant. She has friends. But these problems, these underlying issues, as they describe them in the TV show, continually disrupt her relationship, and they define her and how she can kind of move on some of these things. But she still has a real life, and she still forms real connections with people, and it's this conflict and back and forth and successes and failures. I think is done in a really good way and a lot more comfortable to watch.
Sure.
Than Blue Sky. What do you got for us, Clark?
It's very topical. It's a book called Das Reboot by Raphael Honigstein. It's about the reboot of the German soccer team, the National Mannschaft, in the early 2000s, led by Jurgen Klinsmann, who was also at one point the coach of the United States men's national team. It's just a change of interest about how a country could change a youth program that inevitably ends up changing the way they play at the top levels. And starting at the very basic level with 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds and having a program set in place could lead a team to win the World Cup 10 years, 15 years later. It's interesting.
And obviously the connection to the film is if they're called Mineshaft, there's some construction, there's some big drilling.
Oh, yeah, that's the only reason why I read it, not because I get bored and then I read soccer stuff.
Yeah. That's a good one to check out. Anything else?
Yeah, I would check out the tour. Also spend some time in Las Vegas. There's things to do here other than, lose money on the craps table.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's been a good couple of days. I'm ready to go home in a couple hours here. Before I do, I want to thank you, Clark. Thanks for a great couple of days here in Las Vegas, showing me around, tolerating my constant, hey, did you know about this part of this thing that's happening right now on the bus tour? Where you're just like, it's too early in the morning. I appreciate that. It's good that we were able to connect here, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
I really enjoyed it, Tim. Thanks.
All right, thanks for listening to another episode of the Super Critical Podcast. If you have any suggestions for future episodes or want to tell us what we got wrong, there are a couple ways you can contact the show. We're on supercriticalpodcast.com. There's a contact page and some fun extra features, some resources, things that we use to have the conversation today, informing it. Check that out. That's on that website. We're also on facebook.com/supercriticalpodcast. We're on Twitter @nuclearpodcast, and email the old-fashioned way, supercriticalpodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the program, we'd appreciate it if you'd go on iTunes, subscribing, leaving a review. Helps us grow the show, and we'd love to hear what people are thinking. So, until next time, this has been Tim Westmyer.
And Clark.
And remember, if it's pop culture and radioactive, we are bound to get super critical about it. Have a good one.
Woo!